Keanu Reeves is one of those rare Hollywood figures that almost feels mythical. Stories about his kindness, humility, and unwavering compassion for others, including complete strangers, circulate the internet like modern-day legends. Unlike many of his fellow A-listers, Keanu doesn't surround himself with an entourage or demand special treatment. He prefers to live simply, whether that means riding the subway like an average person, donating most of his Matrix earnings to charity, or even taking the time to comfort fans who approach him with heartfelt stories. But on this particular day, Keanu wasn't in front of cameras. He wasn't on a movie set or signing autographs at a fan event. He was just a man enjoying a quiet moment, savoring a warm cup of coffee at a peaceful outdoor cafe, completely unaware that he was about to step into a situation that would test his character in ways no script ever could. It was one of those crisp afternoons, the kind where the city hummed with life but still carried a sense of calm. The cafe wasn't particularly crowded, just a handful of people scattered at various tables, some chatting in hushed tones, others absorbed in books or scrolling through their phones. Keanu sat at a corner table, dressed in his usual effortlessly cool way, a well-worn leather jacket, slightly tousled hair, and a presence that, despite his fame, didn't demand attention. He liked places like this, where no one bothered him, where he could just exist like any regular person. No red carpets, no flashing lights, just a moment to breathe. Across from him, a few tables down, sat a dog, a medium-sized pit bull mix, its coat a blend of white and brown patches. It had those deep, soulful eyes that only dogs seem to possess, the kind that radiate pure trust and innocence. It was tethered to a chair, most likely belonging to its owner, who had momentarily stepped inside. The dog was quiet, observing the world with calm curiosity, its ears occasionally twitching at the distant sounds of passing cars. Keanu noticed the dog, offering it a small, knowing smile. He had always had a soft spot for animals, especially dogs. They had a purity that most humans lacked. A dog would never lie to you, never betray your trust. If a dog loved you, it was unconditional. It was in this peaceful, seemingly ordinary moment that the balance shifted. The first sign of trouble was the sound, a low, guttural rumbling that grew louder as it approached. Heads turned, mild curiosity flickering across faces. Then, as if making an entrance in a movie scene, a biker rolled up on a roaring black motorcycle, parking haphazardly on the curb. The man who swung his leg off the bike was everything one might expect, a tall, broad-shouldered figure clad in black. His leather vest was adorned with patches, his boots scuffed from years of reckless riding. Tattoos snaked down his arms, and he moved with an air of arrogance, kind that suggested he wasn't used to being questioned. Keanu barely glanced at him at first. He had encountered plenty of people like this, men who wore their aggression like a badge, thrived on the idea that they could intimidate others. It wasn't his concern, not yet. The biker strode toward the cafe entrance, but paused as his gaze landed on the dog. He smirked, tilting his head slightly as if sizing up the animal. "Whose mutt is this?" he muttered, not expecting an answer. The dog, sensing something off, shrank slightly but didn't cower. It wasn't growling or baring its teeth. It simply didn't trust the man looming over it. Keanu, still sipping his coffee, observed without interfering. Not yet. Biker, however, wasn't done. He gave a short, humorless laugh before shaking his head. "Dumb dog," he sneered, and then, without warning, he kicked it. The moment the biker's boot made contact with the dog's side, time seemed to slow. The sound of the impact wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to send a sharp yelp through the air. Enough to make heads snap toward the scene. Enough to send a ripple of shock through the cafe as people struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The dog whimpered, scrambling slightly, its leash tugging against the chair leg. It wasn't a full-force kick, not something that would leave a serious injury. But that wasn't the point. The point was he had done it. There was a pause, thick, suffocating silence. No one moved at first. No one spoke. Then Keanu Reeves stood up. He didn't slam his hands on the table. He didn't knock over his chair in a fit of rage. No dramatic over-the-top theatrics, but he stood. And that simple act alone carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. The biker turned, catching the movement from the corner of his eye. He barely reacted at first, rolling his shoulders as if dismissing whatever was coming next. But then he saw who had stood up. Recognition dawned slowly, creeping across his face like a shadow. Keanu didn't speak immediately. He took his time, adjusting his jacket slightly before taking a step forward, his eyes locked onto the bikers. And then, in a voice that was impossibly calm, yet somehow carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, he asked, "Why did you do that?" A lesson in strength. The biker blinked. For the first time, he hesitated. Maybe he had been expecting someone to yell. Maybe he had been ready for a confrontation, for someone to charge at him with righteous fury. But this was different. Keanu wasn't throwing accusations. He wasn't swearing or threatening. He was simply asking, and that was what made it terrifying. Because now the biker had to answer. He scoffed, trying to play it off. "It's just a dog," he muttered, shrugging as if the situation wasn't worth the attention it was getting. Keanu didn't react. He just stared. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. People in the cafe were still frozen, watching, waiting. Someone had pulled out their phone, probably recording. The biker shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this, being under scrutiny, being held accountable in a way that didn't involve fists or raised voices. And then Keanu took another step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just there. And that's when he spoke again. "If that's just a dog, what does that make you?" The words weren't loud, they weren't cutting or cruel, but they landed with the force of a freight train. The biker opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Keanu didn't break eye contact. He didn't need to say anything else, because in that moment, the message was clear. The biker had been given a choice: to acknowledge what he had done or to walk away from it. The weight of a single action. What happens next? Does the biker get defensive? Try to start a fight? Does Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's beloved action hero, put him in his place with a perfectly executed takedown? Or does something else unfold? Something unexpected? Something that reminds everyone watching that true strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when to stand up and how to do it in a way that leaves an impact far beyond that single moment. Because this isn't just about a biker and a dog. This is about what happens when someone like Keanu Reeves decides that kindness deserves to be defended. And for the first time in his life, the biker is about to learn what that truly means. The world seemed to shrink around the biker. It wasn't the first time he had done something cruel just for the sake of it. It wasn't the first time he had tried to get a rise out of people, to flex his power in the smallest, pettiest way possible. But this was the first time that someone like Keanu Reeves had confronted him about it. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the suffocating silence that followed Keanu's words. "If that's just a dog, what does that make you?" At first, the biker had been prepared to brush it off. He had been ready for someone to yell at him, to make a scene, to throw some empty threats his way that he could shrug off or turn into a fight. But this wasn't what he had expected. Keanu Reeves wasn't acting like some random guy trying to start trouble. He wasn't escalating. He wasn't threatening. He was just standing there looking at him in a way that made him feel like he was being seen, not as some tough biker, not as some untouchable man who could get away with whatever he wanted, but as exactly what he was in this moment, a coward who had just kicked an innocent animal for no reason at all, and everyone around them knew it. The cafe falls silent. The other cafe patrons weren't just watching, they were waiting for a reaction, for an excuse, for a fight to break out. One woman near the entrance had her phone raised, recording everything. A man sitting a few tables away had his hand on his phone, probably ready to call the police if things got worse. The barista inside the cafe had frozen mid-pour, her eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The dog, the very animal the biker had just kicked, sat quietly, its ears flattened, watching with cautious, trusting eyes. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It simply existed, waiting for whatever came next. Keanu wasn't backing down. He wasn't moving forward, wasn't trying to intimidate the biker in any physical way, but he didn't have to. His words had already done enough. A battle of silence. The biker scoffed, trying to reclaim whatever power he had left. He rolled his shoulders, letting out a forced laugh. "What? You gonna lecture me now?" he muttered, shifting his stance as if that might shake the strange, unbearable feeling that had settled in his chest. Keanu didn't react. The biker could feel the judgment radiating off the crowd, the sheer disbelief on their faces. It was the kind of reaction that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be ignored. For once, he was the one being looked down on. It made his skin crawl. "You don't know me, man," he snapped, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "You don't know what kind of day I've had." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying him. "I don't," he admitted. "But I know that whatever's going on in your life, it doesn't give you the right to take it out on something smaller than you." The biker's jaw clenched. It was such a simple sentence, such a basic truth, and yet it landed like a punch. The woman recording shifted slightly, angling her phone to capture his reaction. The biker glanced at her, then back at Keanu, then at the dog still sitting there, waiting. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. The power of accountability. His entire life, he had operated under one simple truth. If you act like you're in charge, people will believe it. If you walk like you own the place, no one questions you. If you do something cruel or selfish and don't apologize, most people won't bother pushing back. And when they did, you fight back harder. That's what he had always done. So why wasn't it working now? Maybe it was the fact that Keanu Reeves, an actual movie star, wasn't looking at him like an enemy. Maybe it was the fact that Keanu hadn't shouted, hadn't insulted him, hadn't even acted like he was worth fearing. Or maybe it was because deep down, the biker knew Keanu was right. Kicking that dog had felt good for a brief second. Not because he hated dogs, not because he had anything against that specific animal, but because for a split moment, it had made him feel bigger than something. And now, standing here, with a dozen pairs of eyes drilling into him, with a phone recording that would probably be online within the hour, he had never felt smaller. A moment of decision. He had two choices. He could do what he always did. Get angry, lash out, make excuses, walk away like none of this mattered. Or he could do something else. Something unfamiliar. He could do the one thing that actually took real strength. The biker exhaled, long and slow. He looked at Keanu, whose face remained unreadable, but whose posture was open, like he wasn't just waiting for a reaction, but for a choice to be made. Then, without a word, the biker turned. He looked at the dog, and he knelt down, not aggressively, not begrudgingly, just a simple motion. For the first time, he really looked at the animal. Its ears perked up slightly, cautious but unafraid. It wasn't flinching. It wasn't scared of him. It was just waiting. The biker swallowed hard. He reached out. His hand hovered for a second. Then finally, gently, he placed it on the dog's head. A single awkward pat. The crowd around them didn't gasp. They didn't clap. They just watched. Keanu nodded, just once. The biker straightened up, avoiding eye contact with everyone, and without another word, he walked back to his motorcycle. No one knew what he was thinking. No one knew if this moment would change him, if it would linger in his mind the way Keanu's words had. But as the motorcycle rumbled to life, as the biker revved the engine and prepared to ride away, one thing was certain. He wouldn't forget this, because kindness, real kindness, the kind that doesn't need to shout or fight to prove its strength, stays with you. And today, Keanu Reeves had given him a lesson he never saw coming. The biker looked over his shoulder one last time before he left. Not at Keanu, not at the crowd, but at the dog. The same dog that hadn't flinched when he raised his foot. The same dog that had waited for whatever came next. It wagged its tail, just once. Then the biker was gone. The street fell silent. It was a rare moment when time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The biker, his smirk frozen on his face, shifted his stance, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. The dog, still trembling, cowered near the cafe table, ears pinned back, confused by the hostility but instinctively sensing that something had shifted. Keanu Reeves remained seated, his hands folded, his eyes locked onto the man who had just kicked the helpless animal. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture, something unnerving, a quiet intensity that made the biker, for the first time, feel the consequences of his actions. The tension was thick, suffocating. The cafe patrons, who had been too stunned to react before, were now motionless, their gazes bouncing between the biker and Keanu as if watching a storm brewing on the horizon. A slow, deliberate exhale left Keanu's lips as he pushed his chair back, the metal scraping softly against the pavement. He stood, not with haste, not with anger, but with a measured control that made the biker's throat tighten. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Keanu's voice was low even, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of disappointment, worse than rage. Scoffed, shifting uncomfortably. "It's just a damn dog," he muttered, though his voice lacked the bravado it had before. The second those words left his mouth, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't just Keanu's face that hardened. It was everything around him. The cafe guests straightened in their seats, their expressions darkening. A man at a nearby table, who had been hesitant to interfere before, now clenched his fists. Even the wind seemed to still, as if nature itself was rejecting the biker's cruelty. Keanu took a single step forward, closing the distance between them. He wasn't a large man, not in the way the biker was. The biker was thick with muscle, leather, and tattoos. But Keanu carried something different, something heavier, a presence, and the biker felt it. "You think this is funny?" Keanu asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The biker licked his lips, suddenly aware that he was on the defensive. He tried to chuckle, to play it off, but the weight of Keanu's gaze pinned him in place. "What, you're some kind of dog whisperer now?" Keanu didn't blink. But I am someone who doesn't stand by while cowards take their anger out on the helpless." The insult landed. The biker's nostrils flared, his pride flaring up like a cornered animal. "You better watch how you talk to me, Hollywood," he sneered, stepping closer. "You're just some washed-up actor." Keanu didn't move. The biker smirked again, but it wasn't as confident this time. "That's right. I know who you are. You play tough guys on screen, huh? That doesn't mean—" He never finished the sentence. Keanu took another step closer, just one. But it was enough to make the biker stiffen, because now Keanu was close enough that he could see everything. The slight tremble in the biker's hands, the twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes darted, searching for a way out. He wasn't a man who was used to being challenged. He was used to being feared, and for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "You don't know me," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "You don't know what I've seen, what I've lost." The biker's smirk faltered. "You think being tough means hurting those who can't fight back?" Keanu continued. "You think strength is about breaking things? Real strength is knowing you can break something, but choosing not to." The biker opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. "Let me tell you something," Keanu continued, his voice dropping just slightly. "A long time ago, someone I cared about taught me that our actions define us, that every choice we make, every decision, every moment, decides what kind of person we are." His eyes flicked down to the dog, still curled against the cafe chair, its eyes locked onto Keanu, as if it too understood that something profound was happening. Keanu bent down, gently placing a hand on the dog's head, feeling the tremors still running through its small frame. He exhaled slowly, then stood back up, leveling his gaze at the biker once more. "You made a choice today," Keanu said simply. The biker's hands clenched into fists. "And what, you think you're gonna stop me?" Keanu didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because at that moment, one of the cafe patrons, an older man, silent until now, stood up. Then another and another. A woman in her 50s crossed her arms, her glare sharp as steel. A younger man in a hoodie stepped forward, his posture firm. Within seconds, the biker realized something. He was alone. He had walked into this cafe thinking he was in control, that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence, that no one would stand up. But they were standing now. For the dog. For Keanu. For what was right. The biker swallowed hard, his bravado draining from his face. He shifted his weight, glancing around as if searching for an exit. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of intimidation. "Maybe," Keanu finally spoke again, his voice softer now, "you should leave." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a command. It was a simple statement of fact. The biker hesitated for a moment longer, then scoffed, taking a step back. "Whatever," he muttered. "You're all crazy." No one responded. They just watched as he turned on his heel and stormed away, his boots hitting the pavement with frustration. The moment he was gone, the tension in the cafe melted. Conversations started up again, but there was a shift in the air, a quiet understanding that something important had just happened. Keanu turned back to the dog, kneeling down once more. This time, the dog didn't flinch. It leaned forward hesitantly, sniffing his hand before pressing its head against his palm in silent gratitude. A soft smile played on Keanu's lips. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small granola bar. "Not much," he murmured, "but it's something." A woman approached, her voice gentle. "That was incredible." Keanu shrugged, rubbing the dog's ears absent-mindedly. "It wasn't about me." And he meant it. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about the choices we make. And today, a choice was made. To stand up for something good. And as Keanu sat back down, sipping his now cold coffee, he knew one thing for certain. The world needed more of that. Keanu Reeves stood there, his gaze locked onto the biker, a mixture of quiet intensity and controlled fury burning behind his eyes. The cafe had gone completely silent. The only sound was the soft whimper of the dog as it trembled, still reeling from the unexpected violence it had just endured. The biker, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, scoffed. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "What's your problem, man?" the biker sneered, adjusting his leather vest as if challenging Keanu to respond. "It's just a dog." At that moment, Keanu took a slow step forward. His movements were deliberate, not rushed, every step carrying the weight of something deeper, something dangerous. He wasn't just angry, he was disappointed. "Just a dog?" Keanu's voice was soft, but the words cut through the air like a blade. "That's the best excuse you have?" The biker smirked, trying to mask the creeping discomfort he felt under Keanu's unwavering gaze. Around them, other patrons had their phones out, recording the scene. Whispers rippled through the cafe. Some people recognized Keanu. Others just sensed that something big was about to happen. Keanu glanced down at the dog, still cowering at his feet. He knelt, extending a calm, steady hand toward the frightened animal. The dog hesitated, its body tense with fear. But something in Keanu's energy put it at ease. Slowly, the dog inched forward, pressing its head against Keanu's hand. "There you go, buddy," Keanu murmured, stroking the dog's head gently. His focus was unwavering, but his mind was already formulating his next move. He knew men like this biker. They thrived on intimidation, on thinking no one would stand up to them. Keanu wasn't going to let that slide. The biker laughed, shaking his head. "Oh man, you're really doing this? What, you gonna give me a lecture? You some kind of dog whisperer?" Keanu stood up slowly, his full height now casting a shadow over the biker. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable. "You don't get it," Keanu said, his voice calm but with a razor-sharp edge. The biker's smirk faltered. He shifted uncomfortably, but quickly masked it with another arrogant chuckle. "Oh, I get it," the biker said, crossing his arms. "You think because you're some movie star, you can tell me what to do?" Keanu didn't flinch. He just stared, unblinking, into the biker's eyes. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Not friendly, not warm, but the kind that sent a cold shiver down a man's spine. The biker's confidence wavered. That smile, it wasn't the smile of a man bluffing. It was the smile of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. Keanu took another step closer. The biker instinctively stepped back, barely noticeable, but Keanu saw it. "You know," Keanu said, tilting his head slightly, "I could stand here and tell you about respect, about compassion, about what it means to be a decent human being." He took another step. "But you wouldn't listen, would you?" The biker swallowed hard. The crowd around them was completely silent. No one moved. No one dared to even breathe. They all felt it. That electric energy in the air. The kind that only exists in moments where something truly unforgettable is about to happen.